And actually, an important principle for us in how we built AI is human in the loop. And people are always responsible for decisions. So AI can do a ton of automation and things for you, but ultimately there's a person there who's accountable. And as long as you keep sight of that and make that part of the experience, that's what enterprises want to see. I think their eyes glaze over when they see these demos of like, hey, my company is on autopilot or my process is totally on autopilot. Sort of like self-driving cars, right? It's like, well, it's really great if you can do it 100%, but if you can only do it 99%, I can't use it because the other 1% of the time I'm dead, right? And the downside risk is just too great.
Welcome to another episode of the Supra Insider podcast. In this episode, Ben and I were joined by Rodrigo Davis. Rodrigo is the product leader in charge of Asana's AI product strategy and roadmap. Fun fact, I used to work with him at Asana, and he was also one of our founding members for Supra, playing a crucial role in shaping our community of 350 plus product leaders. Rodrigo is a super sharp operator, and it's no surprise that Asana has always placed him in the company's most strategic bets. In our conversation, we went deep on how he drove AI adoption inside of Asana and how he got all the stakeholders aligned, how he creates a culture of AI tinkering inside his teams and the company, how to balance AI innovation with large enterprise customers, and how he uses AI for personal use cases to build a stronger intuition for what's possible as foundational models evolve, and much, much more. If you're someone working on AI features or are just curious about what it's like to run AI initiatives inside a large tech company, this episode is for you. Enjoy.
If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting app, follow us on Substack, give us a rating. It'll help us a ton and help future people discover us while also making sure you never miss an episode. Thank you.
Amazing. We're live. Rodrigo, so good to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be with you guys.
Amazing.
We've got the Asana Mafia is assembling.
Yeah, and some context too. So I used to work with Rodrigo at Asana. Also, Rodrigo was, I don't know if you know this, Ben, but he was one of our first 8 super members.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, so the experiment went well. And then, could have not done it without him and being involved. It's awesome to continue to see him involved in the community. And go for it.
I was going to say, Mark, and you also interviewed me when I was applying for Asana. You did like my first PM screen. You were one of the first voices I heard. So thanks.
Was Mark a good interviewer?
Yeah, he was. If I remember, you were pretty to the point. I didn't necessarily know what you thought at the time, but it was like, this guy's serious. I need to stay on my game here. So I think that created a good impression. I was like, oh, these Asana folks, they really take PMing seriously. So
yeah. So Mark, you have a poker face, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think it was a phone conversation too, right? It was a phone interview, I believe. Yeah.
Wow, what a memory.
Yeah.
In the before times.
Yeah, and I remember being very impressed with Rodrigo. I still remember what you did at Strava. So yeah, I'm glad it all worked out. And yeah, maybe I think you've been at Asana for 5 years now, which is wild. And you've worked on a lot of very high impact kind of teams there, projects, initiatives. But one of the coolest ones, probably the latest one that you've been working on, which is bringing AI to Asana, both as the company and the product. Maybe we'll start there, right? I think a lot of people now realize, okay, this AI thing is real. I need to get both my company and teams excited and start to implement this. I'm curious, from the journey that I think you started maybe a year and a half ago, what have you learned of what it takes to bring AI to companies and also to launch features?
Yeah, I think so many things. It's definitely been a journey, I'd say, for Asana. It started about 2 years ago where we started really experimenting. And unlike many companies, we had senior leadership that was really bought in on AI and hey, this is going to be part of the future. Let's start thinking about it. But actually getting everybody at a company on board with a strategy like that takes a lot of time. And you're always going to have just a wide spectrum of opinions. And that's a good thing. Like, it would actually be really bad for a company if you didn't have any folks who are like somewhat skeptical of like how much of an impact AI is going to have. I think some of the things that worked really well for us were around trying to make education about AI approachable. Like, it's really just, it's not enough to say to people, hey, here's a bunch of links, listen to a few podcasts. If someone drops you into a topic you're not familiar with or perhaps are skeptical is like worth learning about, super hard to motivate yourself to consume that content and get something out of it. So one thing we did was really try and make that education like tailored to Asana. So I helped us put together a video series that we called AI 101. And we were lucky to have an AV team to help us do a bit of production on it. But essentially, all I did was say, okay, for people in different functions at the company who are going to have to interface with AI, like legal, marketing, security, etc., just have them talk for about 10 minutes each on what do they think AI means for them? How is it changing their job? What could it mean for Asana? And we just put all that together and we made kind of like a self-guided course and we shipped it out. We said, hey, if you've just got an hour to learn about what AI means for Asana, check out this course. And there's like a simple quiz at the end. And we made it optional also. We didn't require anyone to take it because we didn't want it to have that vibe of some of those like security video things that you're required to do. And I've just seen so many people like try and find all the hacks for like, how can I click through this without watching and stuff. We didn't want it to have that feel. But yeah, we shipped it out. We shared it with people. And, you know, I did a fair amount of just like socializing of it. But over the course of like 2 months, something like 80% of people in R&D watched it during evolution, got to the end. And also then what I saw was that folks in other functions, like in sales, were then like forking it and making their own version. So that was a really good starting point just for like, okay, now people can get over the hump of I know nothing and I'm scared and I don't know how to apply it, which I think is a huge hump for a lot of people.
How long did it take you to go from the idea that maybe this is something that Asana should do to shipping it? Like how fast was that period?
The original like AI Tiger team, which actually wasn't a part of, I think it was like 2 months or less. It was a real like super fast sprint to let's get our first just like toe dip out there. And yeah, those features were focused on like individual productivity, help me rewrite my comment, break down a task, that kind of thing. And we knew going in that those weren't going to be very differentiated in the long term. However, they're just simple and help people see, oh, okay, if I bring AI and work management together, actually, this starts to become very useful.
Got it. So the goal was maybe twofold. One, make sure people are not completely confused or unaware of the 101 level of what AI is at right now. If they've been busy, heads down, like give them a chance to maybe catch up a little bit. And that would be on the level of both how can I use this maybe in my job? But maybe the secondary goal would be maybe I could apply this to a project I'm working on or something that would benefit our customers. Were those maybe like the two primary goals of doing this?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Although for anything new like this, like a technological innovation, I think sometimes people trying to apply it to their job first can be harder than, say, trying to apply it to something outside of work where there are just fewer, you have more control over the goals and there's less to think about. You don't need to think about stakeholders. A story I tell a lot of people about how I first got interested in LLMs specifically was I was really frustrated at the amount of time I was spending doing meal planning and recipe generation because I do quite a lot of the cooking in my house. And I had a pretty nice app that someone built a long time ago for doing this, but there was still just so much work. And one day I was like, maybe I could just recreate this entire app experience by asking an LLM a bunch of questions about what I should cook next week and what the recipes should be. And that was my route in, actually, because there I got to just learn a lot of things about what LLMs are good at and not things like the concept of leftovers, right? An LLM doesn't realize that when you're planning meals, you have to cook the original thing before you can cook the leftovers. And things like, hey, if I give it 0 other instructions, like the kinds of foods, the recipes that it suggests maybe skew in a certain direction, and I have to tell it, hey, I want a mix of these cuisines. And I think like giving people the chance to just learn about something in a low stakes way like that, and a thing that really matters to them, they have a lot of control over, that's something we've tried to encourage. I think the other piece I would say is you can consume all the content you want, but you have to be able to get hands-on with AI, and I think with any new technology, but definitely with AI, to really understand like what can this do and not do, and what is hard and what is easy. So I think one of the things I'm proudest of actually that Asana did on this front is we have this internal feature that we call the debug dialogue that was built just for engineers to troubleshoot prompts on features. But actually, what it is, you can just hit like tab space, it is in our internal environment, and you can bring up for any AI feature the prompt and the model that's being run against, and you can change it. So that immediately allows you to see what is doable with prompts. And because it's running on a feature that's already in the product, you get that UI for free. So you can actually build your own feature just by writing the prompt and then be able to see the outcome. So I'll take a quick example. We have a feature that provides summaries of projects and portfolios. There's like a little widget in the UI that will show that summary. You could go in and customize the prompt there and make that widget do whatever you want. It could be like, here are the risks in this project. Here are the open questions in this project. And so we found that actually making that available to people and having them be able to put their hands on the steering wheel in a very low risk way was really transformative. They're like, oh, now I get what this prompting thing is all about. And I can see it for myself.
That's so cool. And maybe some context, Ben, like at Asana, every employee is a power user of Asana. Basically, like you probably spend 60% of your time in Asana, either managing projects or replying to comments. So I'm guessing, Rodrigo, like, I'm not sure if you can share any data, but like what percentage do you think of the Asana employees from across different departments use that feature or played with it?
The debug dialogue specifically, like to customize.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I'm not sure. I would say like on the R&D side, I would guess it's like among PMs, certainly of the like workshops we've done, it's like a pretty high percentage. Although I think the other thing I would say, you mentioned folks are in the product all the time. Sometimes internal audiences can be like some of the harshest critics, right? And can be some of the hardest folks to get to adopt something new because they already have a way they like to use the product, and you're sort of asking them to change that. And so something that's also been important for us, because we're shipping stuff quickly and some versions of features are going to be scrappier than others, it's really important for me to be super loud and for other folks working on AI to be super loud when we've improved something. Because I think, one example is like when we first shipped chat in our product, it was somewhat limited in how much back and forth you could do with it. And some folks internally found that pretty frustrating. They were like, oh, I just want it to behave like ChatGPT or Claude, and why doesn't it do that? Which was a totally fair criticism. And we made a lot of changes to it. And just 4 or 5 months ago, we shipped really like a total V2 of that feature. So it works significantly differently now. It has a lot more power. And still today, sometimes I find myself talking to folks internally who are like, yeah, I know about chat. I used it. I'm like, how long ago did you use it? And they're like, oh, like 18 months ago. I'm like, okay, you need to try again. And I had a really fun example of that just this morning where someone was like, wow, this feels like a completely different feature. So I think that internally, especially you work at a product company, people get fatigued with like new releases very easily. And so you have to keep repeating, updating, and showing people. With AI, there's so much talk, there's so much vaporware. You really have to show people the value right away rather than just telling them that it's great.
I think it's so interesting. I think a couple of things stand out so far. One is that the leadership level buy-in to AI. I mean, Asana is extremely tech forward, right? Like your leadership is, I think it's Dustin Moskovitz, who's your CEO, right? Ex Facebook, cutting edge, like technologist. So I'm guessing there's a lot of interest from the top to just stay at the cutting edge of AI. My question about that is, how prescriptive is leadership about how AI fits into the roadmap and the vision versus kind of just like stating it as a priority, but letting a lot of the specifics emerge from the teams or people at your level, Rodrigo?
Yeah, great question. I would say our leadership has done some really helpful like visioning around what might the future of AI look like, how might that apply to Asana at like a 5,000 to 10,000 foot kind of level. When I look back at some of those early docs that Dustin and others wrote like a couple of years ago, And I'm impressed with like how much of it they got right, because most people have been pretty wrong on these things. But yeah, those things are at the level of just like long-term architecture, long-term considerations. Beyond that, we're still guided by the same customer jobs and problems that we were before. Those jobs haven't changed. People still want to know who's doing what by when and why. They want to get their work done more efficiently. They want to be able to maximize the impact they can have. And Gen AI, LLMs are one how, ML is another. There's many other tools in the toolkit. I think we've been lucky that, yeah, leadership has not said, you must do it in this exact way. I think the thing that we have aligned on is there's sort of two tracks with AI. And I find this comes up with customers a lot as well, is one track is help me do the thing I'm doing today more efficiently. And the other is help me do it in a completely different way. And some people skew really strongly one side or the other. I think where we're at today is you need to do both, because there is appetite to change the way we work, like quite radically. And that's exciting. We need to have an eye on that, because that is the thing that is going to disrupt the way work is in the future. And we're seeing some of that happen quite rapidly. But there's also a lot of stuff where we're not sure what the future state of, say, that thing is, but there's sure as heck a lot of opportunity to do it more efficiently today with AI. And so we have to seize that. I think one place where we've seen that, for instance, is last year we launched Asana's second ever product, AI Studio, which is built on the sort of no-code automation engine that we've had for many years. But it allows you to, instead of having to list out all your different conditions and think about every potential fork in the road or branch in the tree, you can write more open-ended prompts, give AI kind of context, and have it make decisions in that way. And that is amazing for driving efficiency in existing processes. And so we've been able to get traction with customers really quickly around some of those things. And they can actually show and demonstrate, hey, this process used to take X amount of hours on average. Now it takes this. We've got to be making sure that we're delivering that value whilst we're also thinking about, hey, what if we transform the way this thing works entirely?
Yeah, I love that framing of those two tracks. And it's interesting. I've been spending a lot of time like thinking about like what products do people mention the most? Standalone AI products, right? And something that's interesting is like Granola, the note-taking app, has been by far the one that gets the most amount of mentions. And I think the reason for that is like that first track, right? It's helping me do something more efficiently. And I think that really helps with adoption and maybe dip your toes and then realize, okay, like there's something cool here. And then I think once you get into that mode, then I think you can shift into it. Now I trust this tool to completely redo a workflow completely differently. I'm curious, like, how do you, in terms of like portfolio allocation, right, for your AI team, how do you think about how much are you putting into that first track versus that second track?
Yeah, I think that definitely shifts over time. Yeah, I'm hesitant to just sort of like guess at what the percentage is right now.
Yeah, or how do you think about it? Are you prioritizing more one than the other? And like, how do you think that will change over time based on like adoption or any other metric that you're tracking?
Yeah, I think how I think about that is depending on the team and sort of the target user, getting a sense for like how much more efficiency, how much more is there to be had in efficiency gains versus like how much actually should we rethink this entire thing? What's the customer appetite for doing that? I think that's what you have to be guided by. And something I've noticed both at Asana and just looking at AI in general is you can get a sense for like customer appetite for innovation generally based on two things, like how competitive of a market are they in and what is their position in that market. The more competitive the market they're in, generally the thinner the margins, the more hungry they are for innovation, and especially if they're not the leader in that market. Whereas if the opposite case is if you're the leader in a non-competitive market, you have very little incentive to change the way that you work. I think this is an example of why we've seen so many AI companies around customer support. It's because it's a super competitive market with extremely thin margins. And so that's how I think about it. Like for the different customer jobs, yeah, what are they most sensitive to? What are their KPIs, frankly? Like how much do they care about efficiency versus differentiation? And I think in enterprises, you can get a whole range of that because large companies, you'll see many of them have AI councils where their whole job is to figure out, hey, how do we differentiate for the future? how do we think about where our business is going to be 10 years from now? And those folks, when we're talking to them about AI, they really want to know, hey, what is the new way of doing things? They're not as interested in efficiency. Whereas if we're talking to a CIO or a PMO kind of office, thinking more operationally, then for them, efficiency is likely like more of a near-term thing that they're really trying to drive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's like something around like company size, the industry and their position in the industry, maybe also like around the persona, right? Like I think some personas are probably more like, or roles are more likely to be open to reinventing the wheel versus maybe like optimizing. And I think what I'm curious about, I think from my perspective, it's a lot easier to optimize something that already exists, right? Like, hey, instead of having someone to write status updates, it's an easy kind of evolution to be like, what if AI could write the status update? But I think that the hard thing is, how do you come up with new patterns that don't exist, that you have to build from the ground up with a new technology that's so nascent that you almost don't really know how to do that? So I'm curious, like, how can designers and PMs that intuition of what's possible and what are the different pieces or Lego blocks or Lego pieces that they can play with?
Yeah, I think one way I've thought about that is a lot of what makes jobs hard today is like the limitations of the technology that we're using and the way that we've been told that, say, some process needs to work. And there's so many situations where like technically we have tools for doing a thing, but you watch how people do it and they don't really use the tools. They find other ways around it. One that comes to mind is something like, say, strategic planning and forecasting, where there's lots of ways you could do that and like very methodical, like time expensive things, ways to approach it. But generally, I feel like many companies don't do a great job of that, or they're like not happy with the outcomes they get and they end up making decisions based on other factors. And I think that's because that's a limitation of the tools we have today. And so I find like just completely step back from what tools are people using today and say, you have this aspiration of this thing you think could be great, but you find it frustrating or hard to do. If you were doing it with a person, if you had a team of people who you could collaborate with, how would you do it? And I think like thinking about AI in terms of a series of teammates rather than a tool, I've found that to be like a helpful framing. Because in a lot of ways, like working with AI is more like working with people than it is with like traditional UI. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's like super abstract, but
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And then I guess the question is like, what is the best medium to collaborate with that teammate, right? Is it like chat? Is it more visual? Is it a whiteboard? I think that's like the next step. But I think that's such a helpful way to think about it, right? Like when do you involve that teammate? When do you want to get them involved? When do you want them to get you involved to get approval? Like I think that's a really cool way to think about it.
Do you see PMs on the team prototyping their ideas with AI and trying to like almost like leverage AI to think about where AI could fit in and find those applications?
Yeah, definitely. I think like something that's taken off pretty quickly for us is just like that very lightweight prototyping in AI. So you have a feature idea and you're like, okay, could we do this? How well could AI do it? And most of those follow a simple pattern of, if I had access to this data, which I can say copy and paste in a sample of, and I gave it these instructions, would I get something out at the end that was useful? And that's like a simple flow you could go through for anything. Again, take a really simple example. How good would AI be at detecting like risks on this set of work? You can paste in a bunch of the like recent activity on that project and ask AI, what do you think the top risks are here? And see what it comes back with. And you get an immediate sense of, okay, this is something AI is good at or not, or this particular model I'm testing is good at or not.
And then you could add some instructions or some reference files that say like, here's like 10 examples of a time when a project was at risk. This thing was happening. And here's example 2, this thing was happening. And you could probably feed it like a training data set that's making it better and better at understanding how you define what risk means, right?
Exactly, yeah. And like that ability to just paste in attachments, work with artifacts. It's funny to think now that like 2 years ago, like we couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And now it's just like so obvious, and the amount of data that we can share with an LLM, just with the basic consumer tools that are out there, is just growing and growing. So yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that just like speed to validating something is just one of the reasons why people rightly got so excited about AI and product.
I know that, or at least when I was at Asana, we had a very well-defined product process, like that double diamond. for like discovery and then delivery. And we had basically to do checkpoints at every step along the way, basically. So what you just described of the prototyping, where is that happening? Is that happening like at the spec level, or and then like after you've tested out, then you get the designer involved, or is it happening across all these different checkpoints? Yeah, how's that working?
Yeah, it's definitely changed our process some, I would say, because it's happening very early. I think and we very much encourage that. It's don't wait to do tons of research on something. Start prototyping early, get a feel for what's working, what's not. And also have everybody ride along with you. Like, you don't need to be an engineer to do prompt prototyping. Designers can do that. Some of our best prompt writers early on were UX researchers, just because a lot of them had studied linguistics and stuff and had like different vocabulary about like how to ask for things. That was one thing I noticed. And yeah, so I think product process wise, you have to be, you're going to start with a bunch of assumptions. You're going to prototype, a bunch of your assumptions are going to be wrong, and then you're going to keep going. And in parallel, you're going to be doing customer discovery with that and showing customers your prototypes. Maybe this sounds obvious, and I think is a way that early stage companies have always done it. But I think that's even more important with AI.
Have your expectations shifted of the your team now that they have these additional tools and capabilities in their toolbox for like, I'll leave it open-ended and I don't want to lead you too much, but like how have maybe the way that you think about expectations for your PMs, how has that changed?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't think we've formally shifted any expectations around how long will it take you to write a spec, for instance, when you could theoretically have an LM like generate a bunch of that stuff for you. I'm seeing that just like incrementally happening. I think the big expectation has changed, though, that has changed is to have prototype something before you bring it to the table as something you want to move forward with. There's no need to have a group discussion about can AI do X anymore, because you can just go find out. I think the expectation is they will have done that. So that's definitely shifted a lot. Interestingly, on the kind of the like writing and artifacts that PMs create, I do see a lot of people talking about the PM role is going to go away because AI will just generate the spec for you. I am a little concerned about the amount of volume that we're creating with AI. It's made it so easy to like churn out longer documents. And these documents are just a means to an end. If there's too much that people can't read, what's the point in creating it? And some LLMs are better than others at writing, for sure. But I think an anti-pattern that I've seen definitely on social media, it's so clear. So many blogs now, it's clear that it's AI generated stuff. And I think it's just a waste of people's time, honestly. And I think with AI, because bringing it back to product management, given that we can prototype more, I actually think there's a need to write less because we can show rather than tell. Of course, we still need some canonical docs of what's this thing, why are we doing it, and a spec, sure. But I would challenge people to like, write less essentially rather than more, because people can't read it. Show more of the learning through the product experience and customers' reactions to it.
This is actually something that I don't think it was just about AI, but I think I'm happy to see more PMs doing this. But like one of the things that I did in the last couple, probably, I don't know, 2-3 years is shifted every project I kicked off. I've just learned that I love kicking projects off in design and in Figma and getting all of the early alignment with everyone on the design stage, and then treating the writing of the PRD as almost like a putting of a final bow of some kind on like the thing we agreed to, so that when we ship it and want to look back at what we agreed on, we can have something to look at. But using a PRD or a spec as like the main artifact for figuring out what the experience should be and like what the trade-offs should be from a customer perspective, I always felt like that was a little odd, because everyone's got a different picture playing out in their imagination as they're reading a document, right? Like when you're looking at a design or a prototype, I think that there's not that much room for misinterpreting. It's the ultimate whiteboarding activity, right? Where you're standing at the whiteboard, looking at the thing together, figuring out if we're saying the same thing or if we're actually disagreeing. And I think the difference is now you don't have to go into Figma. And I mean, are you guys seeing like the AI prototyping cannibalize at all? Like the use of Figma to convey ideas or to get alignment on user experience?
Not yet, I would say, because there's a level of detail and like refinement of the experience that I think AI prototyping can't quite get to yet. I think that will probably change over time. But yeah, I think what the prototyping can get you is here's broadly what it might be like, but then to understand, the real details, the flows of the experience, that's something where you need Figma to be able to communicate it. Why I really liked what you said a second ago about we used to use the PRD as the place to figure out the ideas, get the alignment. Why was that? Is because it was seen as expensive to have to go do designs or let alone build prototypes. And what AI is doing is just collapsing the cost of doing that. And so therefore, if it's cheap to do it, we'll do it the highest fidelity we can. And I think just that whole spirit of AI makes it really easy to iterate and throw stuff away because it's cheap. That's what I'm most excited about. I think probably my hobby horse at the moment as I look at AI products is how few of them are built with iteration in mind, or the iteration that is allowed is just quite clunky. Even in some great products that I enjoy. The beauty of AI is you think about how AI was trained and how it got great at things like video games and chess and stuff. It's being able to run the simulation N times. If we could do that in product development, how much better choices would we make, right? If every time there was a disagreement and someone says, what about this? If you could quickly show, oh, here's how that would work in the product, that would be amazing. And I think that's the direction we should be going. The perception of give AI instructions, I hit a button and then I get a thing and then yay, it's good or it's bad. One, that doesn't map to how good AI is today. But two, it just doesn't map to how people think. How often have you drafted something and been first draft, great, I'm just gonna send it. You would only do that for something that was very low stakes, fine. But if there's anything that you care about or that you have any authorship or believe you're bringing any craft to, frankly, you're going to want to go through it a few times at least. And that's a feature, not a bug. That is the joy, is making the thing better and iterating. So
any particular tools you've fallen in love with? Just because you mentioned that you've been playing with some of these, then Marc, I'm curious what you're going to ask, but I'm just curious, Rodrigo, while you mentioned that, any specific ones that you're really loving?
Just thinking of the ones where I felt frustrated. And
Those are interesting too. Yeah, if you feel comfortable giving them some encouragement.
I'm cautious to say bad things about great tools that are forging, things that weren't possible yesterday just because they're not perfect. But I think to take, say, for instance, the category of coding tools where you're able to generate stuff and chat with them to iterate on the code that you're writing. And full disclosure, I haven't shipped production code in 10 years, but besides personal projects, which doesn't count. And so I know enough to be dangerous, let's say, and building static sites and stuff like that for sure. But I've used some of these tools to kind of troubleshoot and learn the latest framework and do something. And something that I've noticed is it's really great when you start because you can just say, hey, use this framework and make me a web app that does this. And you're like, wow, okay, I got that off the ground so quickly. But I found as you start to iterate, me at least, I become more verbose because the more I see, the more concrete my ideas become. It's oh, I see what we've got. I actually want A, B, C, D, E. And the more verbose I become, the more I'm typing in the chat. The whole iteration cycle is slowing down as my ideas get higher fidelity, which is the opposite of what you kind of want to happen, hopefully. Or at least it just, for me, it makes me feel this is the limits of chat. This is now, I guess I could use voice, sure, but also I would just be talking a lot. So maybe there are other ways. And I think another sort of feeling I've had with using coding tools that work in that way is once you're in a certain funnel, it feels like it's being treated like an optimization problem. And you're well, I just want to actually question that decision I made 10 decisions ago and before could do something completely different. And that feels really hard to do. And coming back to what we were saying about AI collapses the cost of being able to change your mind, I want to see more of that in those tools.
Yeah. It almost feels like those tools, you need different modes of operating, right? You have the mode of getting started, then the mode of iterating on an existing feature, and then you need the debugging mode. Because that's another thing of when you have a bug or something's not working, it's such a bad experience, in my opinion. To just trying to find the issue, then having to go back. A lot of times it's just rewriting the whole thing all over again, which kind of wishes, it makes me wish that I knew a little bit more about CS to be more effective there. But yeah, to bring back the conversation to like what you were saying, Rodrigo, like I completely agree with you. I think the anti-pattern of AI right now is like, yeah, because I can do artifacts quicker, I do more of them. I think like Ben and I have talked about this a bunch too. Is I think that the cool part is that actually you actually can save time creating the artifact, and then that means that you can spend more time talking to customers, which instead of like, let's say you were developing a feature in 2 months, instead of like maybe talking to customers in 2 different instances, now you can talk to them in 4 different instances, right? And then maybe the feature that you ship has been iterated 4 times instead of 2, and you don't have to spend more amount of time, which I think that's probably where the high leverage work is right now. And the other thing that I was thinking about too is back to your point that you made earlier, that one of the cool things about prototyping, and especially with Asana data, is that to be able to play with that data and then being able to see, okay, is this actually going to be helpful? Like I think whichever product is able to like very quickly hook up like their databases and then be able to show a prototype with the customer data and then let them play with it very quickly, I think that's just going to be such a game changer for product development, because I think like it's harder to picture how useful something's going to be unless your data is there. So I'm excited. Are you guys doing anything like that at Asana where you're letting people, like users, manipulate their own data in a way that's maybe like the UI is not super pretty, but at least you can get some results or something like that?
Not in exactly that shape, but like one thing we're investing a lot in is cross-app AI and being able to bring data in from outside of Asana. Because yes, our customers do a lot of their work in Asana, but it's also in email and Slack and Docs and all those kinds of places and vertical tools and so on. And so, yeah, actually in the past year, we've been partnering with AWS on this. They have an initiative called Q Index, which is, this really ambitious project. It's a giant vector store of all of your SaaS data. And you can make that available to Asana AI without needing to formally integrate, let's say. So you can take a really unstructured data source like email, and then whenever you say you ask a question of Asana AI, it'll answer based on what's in Asana, but also all those other places. And exposing it in chat is the first thing that we're going to do. We've shared that a little bit, demoed that in a couple of places, but there's a whole ton of other use cases for it. For instance, in like automation and workflows. And that I'm really excited about. I think clearly that's also a space that lots of companies are going after in different ways. Some a sort of like federated search kind of model, others building connectors to various different tools. Everybody is trying in some way to be that like hub of information. I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think what's fairly likely to happen is we're going to have to design for that interoperability. I think this is why some people have said that the data moats of the past actually are going to be less important with AI. There's a lot of debate around that, but I definitely see like where that opinion comes from. What I'm excited about from a customer point of view is people are just really tired of all this context switching between apps. I've been talking about it for years. Enterprise search, like great cross-app enterprise search, was a thing we were promised a long time ago and never quite came to fruition. I'm remaining optimistic that like maybe this time we can actually deliver on the promise, because I've started to see it in some of the work we're doing and other people are doing.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest problems is that none of the big players are incentivized to develop the interoperability, right? When I think about Microsoft, they don't really have any incentive to get you the interoperability with the Google suite of products, because they own, I guess, Salesforce owns Slack. They would have to collaborate with Google Suite if you wanted to have some kind of integration between your documents and your Slack in a way that was like interoperable. Same with Apple, because a lot of us are doing stuff in iCloud now, and if your iCloud stuff isn't connected to your Google, so I'm just curious how the incentive models end up playing out. We don't know yet. I think we don't know, but I think there's a lot of demand for this stuff. And then obviously, like, how does OpenAI fit? How does Claude fit? Are you using both ChatGPT and Claude right now personally and testing the differences, or where have you fallen here?
Yeah, I use all of them. And I use all the things that come around. When Mistral released the chat the other day, I had to download that just I thought the name was so cool. I feel like they won AI names for the moment.
Very French of them.
That's right. But yeah, them, Perplexity, all the kind of big apps, of course, like being in this space, you have to be trying them out. in Asana, the product, we use both OpenAI and Anthropic models today. And yeah, I think going back to your question of the incentives here around interoperability, I think what some folks are realizing is that if we don't design for this interoperability, there's a good chance that AI just jumps the shark anyway with stuff like computer use, where we just don't need APIs anymore. And so we might as well get ahead of it and actually be just design and assume that there'll need to be some exchange. I would say, though, I've noticed that there's a lot of market for like connectors today. Like a company will say, hey, we built this thing and we've got connectors to ABC product. I'd encourage folks to look carefully at that because most of those connectors are just built around like the public API, and it may not have a whole lot of the functionality that you hope for. And so, yeah, it might not exactly be what it claims to be. And so that's definitely going to be a challenge. Because of course, yeah, there are tricky incentives there. Like some companies are not going to want to expose absolutely everything you can do in the product in a public API, depending on their model.
Have you had any success, or has there been anything that's really surprised you pleasantly on the agent space, like some kind of AI product that you have started relying on taking actions on your behalf?
I would say not. I would say reliant. I would say reliance is like quite a strong word there. I don't think I'm relying on any agents yet. And I think the other thing here is if people talk about agents as a binary, and I think there's just a spectrum of agency and like how much judgment and where are the guardrails. I think in my own use of Asana, there are a bunch of workflows that I've built like via AI Studio that I guess I would say I rely on and are different forms of agency. One is for organizing my own work. I have one workflow that will estimate for any task that comes in, it'll estimate how long it's going to take and then organize it accordingly. That's very scoped. I don't think most people would call that an agent, but I think like these things will start to build up over time. I feel like I'm still more in the experimenting rather than the relying phase yet, but I'm looking forward to that. In my personal life, one I would be excited for is help with running training. So I've been using Claude to analyze my runs on Strava and give me feedback about how I'm doing and prepare and do my training plan, those kind of thing. I'm really excited for the day when that just pops up and gives me advice without being asked. And I think that whole space of just like AI being proactive is something that I think is the future and we just have not seen enough of yet.
Mark, can I just ask a follow-up on that? Just because I think we've gotten feedback that some of the most useful stuff we do on this podcast is like really concrete use cases and workflows. So can we just double click into that use case around Strava, Rodrigo?
Yeah.
So do you have a project in Claude that is just for all of your running, and then every time you go for a run, you start like a new chat and you take some kind of, what do you do? How do you get that information in there?
Yeah. So I don't know that I've mastered the right architecture for projects here in Claude, but essentially what I've done is I have a project that's for running training, and I have some like top level artifacts that have like recent runs that I've done, like races as like indicators of like peak activity, have some like charts on like heart rate. Well, this is all stuff I've just gotten from Strava, tracked from my watch. And those are like high level like things to know about me. And then when I'm like training for a particular race, which I'll often do races like every couple of months, I'll have a long running chat about that sort of training preparation. And one of the first things I'll do is have Claude like generate the training plan. Just create a CSV in a format that I can import into Google Calendar. And then whenever I go on a run, come back, I take some screenshots from Strava. Here's how the run went, give me feedback. And then Claude will give me some feedback. Encouragement, which frankly often is like the main thing I need. It's like, oh, I did that run, I felt terrible. How am I possibly hit my goal? And Claude's like, it's actually fine because you're in this heart rate range or whatever. But it also will give me like, hey, based on this, you could consider tweaking your training plan. Do you want to do that? And then sometimes it'll even get super deep into like logistics. Like I remember once I was doing like a practice race, and I didn't have access to my car that day. And I had a choice of like, should I run to the race and then take a train or an Uber home? Or should I do the opposite? Like what's better for my training? And it was able to like work through the logistics of that with me and help me plan what time should I leave my house. This is like very fine grain help that like you would have to pay a running coach a lot of money to do this. Most of them would not want to do that with you. So
yeah,
so interesting.
But I would use that because Rodrigo is a very serious runner. And I'm an amateur runner, but basically I have my Garmin that I track my runs on because it's just more precise. Then I have my Aura ring for sleep. And I almost wish I had like an app that connected the two of them and also track, based on when you exercise, you slept better or you recover better. Not just like what training to do for that day, but also like when to do it. I think that would be like super helpful. And then also like bring in insights proactively too. Be like, hey, I noticed when you did this, you did that. So let's make sure that you're aware of it next time you do it differently.
Yeah, I really wish I didn't have to spend time screenshotting my phone from Strava stuff to put in and finding like what's the most efficient part to scroll to give it the most information. It would be so great if that data was just like getting pulled in more automatically. I actually was playing around the other day with having Claude like make an app for me that would do this, but I haven't dedicated time to it yet, but it would be super useful.
Yeah, I think I'm just excited about the entire, because in a world where I'm guessing you've both seen the operator demo from OpenAI. In a world where that product just like works like magic for everything, and you could just give it a username and password for Strava and just say like once a day, or just like once a day log in, and if there's any new run data, take a screenshot of the route that I ran and any key metrics, and then pipe it right into whatever AWS storage folder, and then you can have a different job running that's like anytime something else gets added to this, I want you to add it to my project in Claude or some wrapper, and then send me a report based on like trends. So all you have to do is go for a run, and then maybe like 20 minutes later or whatever, or an hour later, you get like an email or a message that's just like, here's what you need to know. And it's all just happening for you. It's working for you in the background. I would just, if I could do that, I feel like the world of possibilities for how I personally use AI agents to do things for me and get leverage would just explode, because there's all these things we all do every day with in different tools that have their own usernames and passwords. And there's a specific page or a tab within a page that you go and look at a specific thing. Mark, I'm just thinking about all the podcast stuff that we do. If I could just be like, once a day, go into Spotify, take a screenshot, summarize the trends, and send me an email on like, how's the podcast doing on Spotify this week? And this, I'm excited for that future. But we're not there yet.
Mine would be like Strava gives me a notification when I've run like 300 miles in a pair of running shoes. And then I go look on whatever site. So that I use like Goat, for instance, because you can get, if you buy a lot of, say, running shoes, you can get them there, different colors and stuff and all that kind of thing. It would be really nice if as soon as my shoes were due to expire, like an agent would just go find a good deal on a similar pair of shoes and just send them to me. Obviously, I'm sort of like a prosumer in this running space, but there's so many other like business use cases for this where people are doing that kind of repetitive thing over and over. And there's no art to it. Like maybe there is some amount of enjoyment. Sure, I get some enjoyment finding a pair of sneakers, but also I'm probably missing out on a bunch of like good deals and things because it's just this thing I don't particularly want to do.
Yeah. And that's why it's interesting. Yeah, I think the APIs are going to become less and less important for those reasons. Because like if you just have an operator that's able to access the data for you, what's the point at that point? Unless you want a product that's very opinionated about how you should get the data in the most useful way possible. Maybe now shifting gears, something that we haven't talked much about the podcast, but I was actually really excited to talk to you about, Rodrigo, is that we've been talking a little bit about the product process, right? Around like how it seems like most of the product process has been accelerated by AI. But I'm guessing, and I might be a wrong guess, is that shipping AI products, you actually probably want to go slower than you did before, especially when you're working with really big customers. And I know Asana has a bunch of those, right? Like probably those like 8-9 figure deals. So I'm curious, like, what does it take to take an AI feature in the last mile and make sure that it works and that it doesn't blow up like a big deal that is bringing a significant revenue for the company?
Yeah, that's like the most important question of the moment. I think the first thing like we tell teams that haven't worked with AI before is like getting from 0 to 80 is really fast. Getting from 80 to 100, it can be really slow, especially depending on how you did that first part. I think if you did that first part with no sense of what great looks like, then that last 20 is going to be hard because then you're going to be figuring it out. There's a lot of talk about evals at the moment, which can be as simple as just writing a couple of bullet points about what a good output looks like, all the way up to like having a well-instrumented like pipeline that's going to do those tests for you automatically, which is like the gold standard. But I think we really have to have that mindset of, okay, we're dealing with something here that's going to have stochastic outcomes. What are the things that we want to be great at? Let's have really strong evaluation for those things. Let's communicate to customers that like, this is what this feature is intended to do. This is what it is great at. And then for the long tail of just other things it could possibly do, or other things that a customer could try and get it to do, or get it to behave in a particular way, let's try and handle those cases as gracefully as possible. And often I think the safest path there is just to like redirect people to something else rather than trying to solve every last possible case, to actually just have really graceful like redirection back into, hey, this is what the feature is supposed to do. And just narrow the field of what you're trying to be good at, and make sure customers know what that is. I think an interesting example from the early days of Asana AI was we had this feature that can generate subtasks for you. So, our expectation was, hey, you've got this complicated task with a bunch of like discussion on it. There's next steps, but no one's written them up. Let's actually pull that out of all this content and generate next steps. Great. And it works pretty well if you've got like lots of content. We noticed like quite early on when we shipped that we were getting a lot of thumbs down feedback. And when we looked at it, something we noticed was that people were actually triggering this feature on tasks that had no content in them. Like they just maybe had a few words in a title and no other description. And of course, what that told us was, people assumed this was going to like help them ideate, which is a totally different use case, and which we could do, but would require like different UI, need to work entirely differently. And I think the lesson I took from that is just like, people have such a wide range of ideas about what AI can and can't do that there's a good chance they're going to go to your feature and try and use it for something completely different than you intended. I know that a situation existed before AI. I just think AI has like magnified that because, you've got all this just wide range of knowledge and expectations.
Yeah, and I'm curious maybe for that specific example, right? Is your approach usually like, let's launch this feature to 100% of the users, get that quick iteration and then modify from there? Or is it more like, I'm going to launch it to maybe 20%, get feedback, and then roll it out farther? And maybe like, is there certain situations where maybe you would change that framework either for security risk or different type of clients that you work with?
Yeah, I think for that, it depends on what's the downside risk of this feature, like of getting it wrong, like how high are the stakes around it. I think as a general rule, we try to roll things out as experiments first, just so we can understand like the impact of them. Both, do they work like local metrics, but like obviously, do they drive top line metrics? Do they improve collaboration within an organization? All those things. And you need some kind of experiment framework to be able to do that. If you just ship to 100%, you'll find it hard to measure that stuff. But I think in terms of how cautious we are on that, I would say, we have some principles around like, don't lose customer data. Obviously, don't compromise security, privacy, access control. All those things are absolute non-negotiables. And so that protects us from most of the risk we would be most worried about. The main risk, honestly, is more like reputational of like, does this feature seem kind of janky? And then that makes people trust Asana less. There, I think it's about, we've tried to really focus on target customers and try and direct our experiments to them rather than to a general audience. And then I think users tend to be a little more forgiving. By the way, I would say like I've been pleasantly surprised with a lot of AI that we've done is like users are way more forgiving than we thought they would be. Like of the people who are using something, I think for a lot of people, they see new features and they just might glaze over it. They're not interested. But if you're meeting them at the right point in their workflow, say for instance, write my status update for me, that's such a pain point. That's so many people's Friday afternoon that they just dread, that any help is welcome. Anything that like, even if all you did was get them like 10 links to things that recently happened and the rest of the update was not useful, you still save them probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And so, we've tried not to take advantage of that, but I think we have tried to bias towards, hey, if there's something is at least incrementally useful, adds value, let's ship it and learn from how people are using it, rather than try and get the perfect feature, because things are just moving too quickly in AI to do that.
I'm guessing like a tricky part of this process is like working with maybe like those like Fortune 100 companies that are probably like very excited to get into AI, and they have maybe those founders, CEOs that we need to get our hands on, but also that reputation risk can be pretty big for the top line of the company. So I'm curious, like, what have you learned about partnering with sales and customer success to get those customers at the right time and maybe rolling out those features for those big accounts?
Yeah, I think something that we were really lucky to be able to do with a lot of big customers, especially when we were starting out in the AI journey, was many of them reached out to us and said, like, hey, what is your AI strategy? Because we're trying to figure out ours. You seem to know something about the future of work. What do you think we need to know? And we were able to kind of pressure test a lot of our ideas and directions that way. And then get just their general interest of like, are you excited about this kind of efficiency or this kind of transformation, if you like? I hesitate to use the word transformation because I feel like it can be a bit like disempowering, like somehow technology is going to come and like fix it all for us. And like, clearly that's not the way it's going to work. People are at the center of any sort of transformation that a business does. But yeah, we're able to just like, I think, float those ideas at a very high level. Does this matter to you? Do you care about this? And then if the answer is yes, then you win the right to build with them. We've also found, because of this appetite, especially among bigger companies, to understand what's happening with AI, they're pretty open to like doing early stage experimentation with us within, obviously, you limit the blast radius of those things, right? And actually, an important principle for us in how we built AI is human in the loop, and people are always responsible for decisions. So AI can do a ton of automation and things for you, but ultimately there's a person there who's accountable. And as long as you keep sight of that and make that part of the experience, that's what enterprises want to see. I think their eyes glaze over when they see these demos of like, hey, my company is on autopilot, or my process is totally on autopilot. Sort of like self-driving cars, right? It's like, well, it's really great if you can do it 100%, but if you can only do it 99%, I can't use it because the other 1% of the time I'm dead, right? And the downside risk is just too great. And I think rather than trying to push for just like full AGI, full automation and sell people on that, sell people on, or partner with people on like, how are we just going to make you better at what you're trying to do? What's like the best version of like assistive, but where you still have the control and the accountability that you need? And by the way, I think that extends beyond like enterprise as well. I think every user wants to feel control of the things they want to have control of. And any software company that comes along and tries to convince people otherwise, I think likely won't succeed, because that's just like a very innate thing. And I think our jobs as product people are to identify what are the things that people are okay letting go of control of. And let's tackle those things first. Let's do that extremely well and then earn the right to do the more ambitious things. As we've been talking about today, we're all excited for AI to do more for us. But why haven't we just given over the reins to AI entirely? Well, it's because the products we use haven't yet earned the right for that. We're all on the journey. We're all climbing that hill. But we still got to do the climbing.
Yeah. One thing, just as we start wrapping up here, one thing that you said as well is the last episode we released, where our guest Jacob Bank said that one of the superpowers or the most valuable skills for PMs in this new AI-powered world is going to be developing an intuition around what is easy, what is hard. Always been true to some degree, right? But now it's particularly true. Just curious if you could give advice to other listeners who are product leaders or like senior PMs who are looking to continue to develop their intuition on what's easy and hard and are tinkering. Do you have any advice for what you do to keep developing your own intuition? And like, do you block time to tinker? Yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think definitely block lots of time to tinker. Try all the things out there as much as you can. Try and get them to do extreme things. Try and break them, essentially, just like you might with your own product. I find that to be really helpful. There's some good like social accounts that summarize like the latest AI papers. I feel like at the very least reading the summaries of those things is really useful. And now with things like deep research, you can take an academic paper that maybe you found intimidating and just have a conversation with it. I think that can be really helpful to just see like, what are people experimenting with like at the frontier? Where might some of that be relevant to me? The other thing that I think about a lot, and advice I've given to people when they're trying to figure out like the right use cases for AI, is if you're trying to tackle something that people find it hard to agree upon. 2 or 3 people in a room will find it hard to agree upon. It's probably not realistic to expect AI to be able to do that thing in a way that you will agree with. Certainly not first time. So I think that's just an important thing to bear in mind is like, if you're picking use cases that are like highly subjective, the odds of you being able to do it well are just much lower. And maybe that's okay, because like even doing something there is good enough to maybe solve a blank page problem, something like that. But it's worth bearing in mind. Whereas if there are things where like, hey, actually the universe of like correct answers here or acceptable answers is a bit narrower, you've got a better chance of hitting the target there. And so I get why people have this energy to like, let's solve this problem that people have struggled with for millennia with AI, because maybe now we can finally do it. Sure, we should be trying some of that stuff. But also, we shouldn't be surprised if we can't solve that thing, because there may just be like a human component, a subjectivity of it that is like innately hard. It's just contested ultimately. And so therefore, if we want to be helpful in those kind of spaces, we should think less about like solving it and coming up with the one right answer, because there isn't one. And we should be more focused on like, how can we make it really easy for people to debate this and like think through all the possible scenarios, and then, depending on their strategy, depending who the decision maker is, make that decision. And like I said, I think strategic planning is a great one for that. Where like you could waste a lot of time getting AI to come up with the one strategic plan that everyone can agree on and not get there. But instead, you could just make it very easy for people to have those discussions and debates by equipping them with all the right data, helping them run through scenarios, that sort of approach.
Yeah, I love that. And I also think back to the first kind of analogy that you made of AI being like our relationship, right? Starting with the small things that build trust. And then once you know, hey, I can do this, then move to the next thing. And then I think that point too, you can also very easily find that point where the trust breaks. Like, okay, I think I've reached the level where I think this AI can operate. And I think maybe anything beyond that, I'll have to double check, or I cannot fully trust it. I think that's a great way to think about it. Rodrigo, to wrap things up, just 2 last questions for you. One is, where can people find you? And then the second one is, how can the audience be helpful to you?
Yeah, where can people find me? People can find me on LinkedIn occasionally. I'm not like a serial LinkedIn poster. I started posting more on Blue Sky recently. I tend to be pretty read-only on the other networks. And also at the Asana office in SF, I'm always down to like have lunch or coffee with folks who are in Soma. How can people be helpful to me? I would love to hear just like what people are seeing in terms of the future of work with AI. Who's like doing this really well? Also, like, where are people hitting walls in terms of how they use Asana? Definitely, I always welcome like feedback on how people are using Asana or products like it. And I'd love to hear people's stories of like, where is stuff just not working? There's like some promise that's been made by us or others, and no one's quite figured it out yet. I love hearing about that. So
amazing. People, keep the feedback coming. Rodrigo, thanks so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo.
Yes.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.